0340 local. The Strait of Hormuz, 26 degrees 34 minutes north. A Nimitz-class carrier turns into the wind at 28 knots, steam hissing from 4 catapults as an F/A-18E Super Hornet crouches on Cat 1. 60 miles east-northeast, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer's Spy-6 radar has 4 fast-moving surface contacts, closing on a Panamanian-flagged tanker at 40 knots. The tactical action officer already has release authority. The rules of engagement have changed. In Washington, the president has signed a directive using 2 words the U.S. Navy had not applied to Iranian vessels since 1988. Shoot. Eliminate. This is the story of how 3 American carrier strike groups converged on the Persian Gulf in the first months of 2026, and how a single presidential order rewrote the arithmetic of every intercept in the Strait of Hormuz. It draws from CENTCOM press releases, USNI News fleet tracker updates, Navy.mil deployment announcements, and open testimony before the House Armed Services Committee. The strategic picture in January 2026 was already ugly. The Houthi campaign in the Red Sea had entered its 27th month. Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, IRGCN, fast boats had begun swarming commercial traffic near the Farsi Island approaches at a frequency not seen since 2019. 2 Greek-flagged tankers had been boarded in a single week, and the 5th Fleet commander, Vice Admiral George Wickoff, had told reporters at Naval Support Activity Bahrain that the tempo of provocation was, in his words, operationally unsustainable. That was the diplomatic version. The operational version was worse. By late January, CENTCOM had confirmed that the USS Gerald R. Ford Strike Group, CVN-78, with Carrier Air Wing 8 embarked, was extending its deployment in the eastern Mediterranean. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, CVN-69, had transited Suez southbound and was operating in the Gulf of Aden. And then, on February 3rd, Navy.mil announced that the USS Carl Vinson Strike Group, CVN-70, would surge from 7th Fleet in the Western Pacific and cross into CENTCOM's area of responsibility. 3 carriers, 1 theater. The first time since the 2020 Soleimani strike aftermath that the Navy had concentrated that much deck space in a single command. Think about what that means. A carrier strike group at sea burns roughly $11 million a day in operating costs. 3 of them, simultaneously forward deployed, is a national-level statement written in jet fuel and steaming hours. The Vinson brought Carrier Air Wing 2, 4 Super Hornet squadrons, an EA-18G Growler squadron, an E-2D Advanced Hawkeye detachment, and VFA-97, flying F-35C Lightning IIs. Its escort screen included the guided missile cruiser USS Princeton, CG-59, and destroyers Sterett, Kidd, and William P. Lawrence. Across the 3 strike groups, U.S. Navy planners had roughly 1,100 vertical launch system cells, around 240 combat aircraft, and a submarine screen that USNI News assessed as including at least 2 Virginia-class fast attack boats operating under Task Force 54. The obvious question is why the escalation came so fast. The answer sits in 3 IRGCN incidents CENTCOM confirmed between January 28th and February 11th. In the first, a swarm of 6 fast boats came within 500 yards of the USNS Bighorn, a fleet replenishment oiler transiting east of Qatar. In the second, an Iranian helicopter buzzed a Bahraini patrol at 200 feet. In the third, the one that changed everything, an IRGCN Ghadir-class midget submarine surfaced within 2 nautical miles of the USS Stetham DDG-63 during a night transit near the Strait's inbound lane. 2 nautical miles, at night, unannounced. A Ghadir-class boat is a 120-ton coastal submarine carrying 2 533mm torpedo tubes. At 2 nautical miles from a submerged launch, the transit time of a wake-homing torpedo against a destroyer moving at 15 knots is well under 2 minutes. The Stethem's sonar suite picked up the surfacing event at the moment of broach, not before. That detail alone, the boat had gotten inside torpedo range before anyone detected it, is what moved the incident from provocation to something closer to a rehearsal. The Stethem's commanding officer filed the incident report through Fifth Fleet channels. Within 72 hours, the National Security Council had convened. Within a week, the directive had been drafted, reviewed by the Judge Advocate General's Corps, and forwarded to CENTCOM's Rear Admiral overseeing Task Force 55. The language, per redacted portions later shared with the Senate Armed Services Committee, authorized U.S. Navy warships to engage IRGCN vessels demonstrating hostile intent through demonstrated closure, weapons orientation, or refusal to respond to bridge-to-bridge warning at established distance thresholds. Translation: if an Iranian fast boat closed inside a specified range and did not turn away after the standard hail sequence, the destroyer could fire first. That is not the standard Persian Gulf ROE. That is a wartime standard applied in peacetime waters. The implementation was methodical. Every commanding officer in Task Force 55 received an updated engagement matrix. The distances, still classified, were reportedly tighter than the ones used during the 2019 tanker crisis. Bridge-to-bridge warnings would be broadcast on VHF Channel 16 in Farsi and English. Warning shots, 25 millimeters from the Mark 38 chain gun mounts, would follow. If closure continued, the destroyer's 5-inch Mark 45 mount and the Phalanx CIWS in surface mode were cleared hot. Standard Missile 2s were held for aerial threats. Tomahawks remained in their cells, targeted against Iranian shore-based anti-ship batteries, an escalation reserved for the theater commander. The first live application came on February 19th. The USS Bulkley, DDG-84, escorting a British-flagged LNG carrier through the outbound lane, tracked 3 IRGCN PACAP-class fast attack craft, closing from the Iranian coast at 38 knots. The Bulkley's TAO transmitted the standard warnings. The PACAPs kept coming. At the threshold distance, the Bulkley fired warning bursts from its port side Mark 38. 2 boats broke off. The third did not. CENTCOM's public release later that day confirmed the third vessel was engaged and disabled, with the crew recovered by an Iranian search and rescue helicopter under a bilateral maritime protocol still functioning at the deconfliction level. 1 boat, 1 engagement. The first U.S. Navy lethal action against an Iranian vessel since Operation Praying Mantis on April 18, 1988, 37 years, 10 months, and 1 day earlier.
Praying Mantis is worth a brief detour, because it is the historical memory every flag officer in Fifth Fleet carries into a decision like this. That day in 1988, in retaliation for the mining of the frigate USS Samuel B. Roberts, the U.S. Navy sank 1 Iranian frigate, 1 gunboat, and 3 fast attack craft, and damaged a 2nd frigate so severely it was written off. It was the largest surface engagement the Navy had fought since the Second World War.
It ended in a matter of hours. Within 4 months, Iran accepted UN Security Council Resolution 598 and ended its war with Iraq. What institutional memory drew from Praying Mantis was not that naval combat is easy. It was that a single, disproportionate show of Aegis-era firepower had a shelf life measured in years. In February 2026, the planners at Fifth Fleet were spending down that shelf life. You might wonder why Iran did not immediately retaliate at scale. The short answer is that Tehran's calculus in early 2026 was constrained. Its air defense network had been thinned by earlier Israeli strikes. Its proxy network was degraded. Its economy, per open Treasury Department data, was running on fumes. Full escalation against 3 U.S. carrier strike groups was not, in the assessment the Defense Intelligence Agency offered Congress on February 24th, a survivable option for the regime. That did not mean quiet. Between February 19th and March 12th, CENTCOM confirmed 4 additional intercept events. 2 involved unmanned surface vessels, small explosive-laden drone boats launched from the Iranian coast near Bandar Abbas. Both were engaged by Mark 45 fire from escort destroyers before reaching effective range. 1 involved an Iranian Bavar 2 flying boat, warned off by a Growler from VAQ-131. The 4th involved a suspected IRGCN command vessel that turned back after receiving a targeting radar lock from the USS Princeton's SPY-1B system. The Iranian side was not helpless. The IRGCN operates roughly 100 fast attack craft, an estimated dozen midget submarines, and shore-based Noor and Ghadar anti-ship cruise missiles derived from Chinese C-802 designs. In a mass swarm scenario, the Iranian doctrine driving U.S. Navy planning since the mid-2000s, 100 small boats attacking simultaneously across a 20-mile front presents a genuine saturation challenge to even a full carrier strike group. Every Aegis destroyer captain in the Fifth Fleet has trained against exactly this scenario. Every one of them will tell you in unclassified interviews that the math is unfriendly. Here is the part that does not fit cleanly into a press release. The real risk in the Strait of Hormuz during those 6 weeks was not that the U.S. Navy would lose a ship. It was that the U.S. Navy would win an engagement so lopsidedly that the political consequences, dead Iranian sailors on cell phone video, oil above $140 a barrel, allied governments distancing themselves from the ROE, would cost more than the tactical victory bought. That was the tension every strike group commander was carrying. The steel side of the ledger was solved. The strategic side was not. Vice Admiral Wickoff addressed this obliquely in a March 4th briefing at NSA Bahrain. He said the Fifth Fleet's mission was to defend the freedom of navigation of every flag transiting these waters. He did not say the mission was to shoot Iranian boats. The distinction mattered. In practice, the ROE meant the two overlapped. The operational tempo through this period was punishing. Carrier Air Wing 2 averaged 62 sorties per day off the Vinson. The Eisenhower's Air Wing pushed similar numbers in the Gulf of Aden, supporting continued Houthi target strikes under Operation Poseidon Archer. Underway replenishment ships, the USNS Arctic, USNS Bighorn, USNS Laramie, ran a near-continuous shuttle between Jebel Ali and the strike groups. Fifth Fleet logistics personnel later told USNI News the reprovisioning tempo was the highest sustained rate they had run since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The human cost of that tempo does not show up on a fleet tracker map. Aviation ordnancemen on the Vinson were working 18-hour shifts, moving JDAMs and AIM-126 from the magazines to the flight deck and back down when a mission scrubbed. The ship's medical department, per a wardroom brief later cited in a Navy Times feature, treated more heat stress cases in the first 3 weeks of March than in the entire preceding deployment. 2 enlisted sailors were medevaced to Landstuhl for non-combat injuries related to flight deck operations. The Eisenhower, on its second extension of a deployment originally scheduled to end in December 2025, was operating with a crew whose average time from home port had passed 240 days, the threshold beyond which the Navy's own retention and readiness studies flag material degradation in sustained watchstanding performance. The steel was ready. The steel is always ready. The people running the steel were being asked to hold a posture designed for 6 months and stretch it toward 11. The submarine picture was, as always, opaque, but open-source vessel tracking and congressional testimony confirmed that at least one Virginia-class SSN, believed to be the USS Delaware, SSN 791, was operating under Task Force 54 during the period. Its role, in the words of Rear Admiral Rick Seif, testifying before HASC, was to provide the theater commander with options that do not appear on radar. Read that sentence again. The end game came faster than most analysts expected.
On March 18th, Omani Foreign Ministry channels, the same back channel used in every serious U.S.-Iran negotiation since 2013, opened a discussion about de-escalation. On March 24th, both sides announced a mutual pause in offensive operations in the Strait of Hormuz, with the Iranian Foreign Ministry calling the pause a unilateral gesture of goodwill and the White House calling it a response to demonstrated resolve. Both framings are, to some extent, true. Both governments needed the story their domestic audience needed to hear. The ceasefire held, not because the underlying disputes were resolved, they were not, but because the operational cost to Iran of continued fast boat provocation had exceeded the political benefit. That is how naval deterrence works, when it works. Not through a decisive battle, but through a math problem that becomes unsolvable for the other side. The Vincennes Strike Group departed the 5th Fleet AOR in early April, transiting Bab el-Mandeb northbound on April 6th. The Eisenhower followed 2 weeks later. The Ford remained in the eastern Mediterranean under 6th Fleet control. By the end of April, the Persian Gulf carrier count was back to 0, with a single destroyer squadron, Desron 50, carrying the sustained presence mission. What changed permanently? The ROE published in February remains, per open congressional reporting, the standing engagement standard for Fifth Fleet operations near Iranian territorial claims. The IRGCN's fast boat sortie rate near international shipping lanes has, per CENTCOM's April summary, dropped by about 70% from the January peak. Insurance premiums for Gulf tanker transits, a real money indicator that ignores diplomatic language, fell 41% between March 24th and April 30th. A second, quieter set of changes will outlast the headlines. The Navy's Surface Warfare Officers School at Newport revised its advanced tactical training curriculum in late April to incorporate the February engagement matrix as a case study. The Naval War College's Halsey Group began a classified after-action review scheduled to feed into the next iteration of the Surface Force Strategy document. And inside CENTCOM, the J3 Operations Directorate quietly rescoped its swarm defense wargames to assume that political authority to fire first would, in future crises, arrive earlier in the escalation ladder rather than later. That last shift is the one that matters most. Rules of engagement are not just paper. They become muscle memory. Once a service has fired the first shot under a new standard, the standard tends to stay. Back to 0340 local, February 19th. The Bulkley's 5-inch mount rotates. The third pay cap continues its closure. The Tau speaks 4 words into the ship's intercom. The gun fires. 37 years, 10 months, and 1 day of restraint in the Strait of Hormuz ends with a single burst of high-explosive ammunition into an aluminum hull moving at 38 knots. 1 boat. 1 engagement. 3 carriers offshore, watching. The freedom of navigation the U.S. Navy talks about in its press releases is, at the operational level, this.
A destroyer captain, alone on a bridge at night, with the authority to decide that the vessel closing on him will not be allowed to close any further. Every other layer of the strategy, the carriers, the submarines, the air wings, the diplomatic back channels, exists to make sure that captain never has to use that authority. When he does, something upstream has already failed. In the first months of 2026, something upstream failed exactly once. The Navy was ready for it. The question the rest of the decade will answer is whether that readiness holds when the boats come back. And they will.